Pierce. Thank you all so much for being here today. I'm going to reset of the Alamo plan and ask yourselves so we don't get feedback unless you're talking. So the three issues that we reviewed were repurpose, or that were part of the issues were repurposing, the flexibility of the street closures. I live on a busy street. Sorry, you guys, you all. Flexibility of the street closures, Alamo Plaza. This committee
to have all of our stories interpreted in a way that represents all of our community and all of our cultures well. But I know that our committee and I stand ready to be totally open and trustworthy of your stories, and that they will be presented to the public in the way that you envision that they will. I'll now turn it to John Tasman with TGAV Destination to discuss how they developed the interpretive plan.
Thanks, Erin. Hopefully all of you can hear me okay, and I believe that the sharing of the screen is going okay. I see you, Sue Ann, I see you nodding up and down. I assume maybe you can be my key. You can see my screen okay?
Call this one.
If it says AC Interpretive Plan Meeting number 1.
That's it. Thank you very much.
0267, and that's Charles Hunter.
There's a couple of general.
400267, Charles Hunter.
There's somebody that's unmuted. If you guys can mute, that would help.
Could someone please mute themselves? Thank you.
So these first couple slides we're going to go through prior to rolling out the topics of the next few weeks together. We wanted to share a few slides as a general guide of some strategies. And our team, together with the city and ATI, have been working in the past to be able to do not only research on the content, but research on the demographics of our visitors and the existing audience, but also the tools that we have in front of us. And so there's just a few slides that we want to go through just to set the stage prior to walking through an outline of our future weeks. And so we're going to walk through just a little bit to set the stage of audience research that has been complete, a reminder of the type of messaging and the tools we have at our disposal, both throughout the site, but also then there's a specific conversation we want to have about the uniqueness of a historic site and the ability of interpretation. So first off, when you go to audience research, we wanted to highlight some of the findings of what makes the Alamo unique. And so we did research back years ago in two different ways. It was both online research across 2,000 folks, but also on-site research for people that were right there and did some studies of folks and their impressions while they were there on site. So both of these type of experiences or these types of research for the audience that was there, 250 folks on site, as well as 2,000 folks online of previous visitation, starts to get an understanding of not only who, but what they were thinking, barriers to visitation and their thoughts while they were here. Some interesting just demographic understanding. The male and female, as far as a gender, was an even split for the Alamo. And we do know historically there are some military history sites that skew male. What this means to us is that we want to make sure that everybody sees themselves and represented in the stories. Make sure there's a little something for everybody. It's an important reminder. It's not unique across all of historic sites, but it does something to keep in mind specific to the Alamo. In addition to that, it is important to keep in mind that there's a large majority of the visitors are from outside of Texas. We are going to be talking a lot about stories that are near and dear to the generations and near and dear to all of you as residents of San Antonio, but we also have to make sure that we understand as a collection, the folks that are visiting, approximately over half of those are from outside of Texas, which really means that they're very unlikely to know details of the Alamo story as deeply as what we know it. And understanding and appreciation is important. Orientation is going to be very important. Another reminder is that same number, about more than half, are first-time visitors, which means they have never been here before. They need orientation. They need an understanding of not only the story, but in fact, where they are, and a very strong basis and orientation of what the Alamo is. They also, it's important to keep in mind clear wayfinding, location of amenities, options. So keeping those two factors in mind of demographics, not only outside of the state of Texas and first-time visitors, it does start to set the stage of the importance of a layered messaging, not only the small details, but also the broad facts. Finally, families. Again, a very similar stat, more than half are families, which means that as we think about not only the content and the messaging and the stories that we are telling, also how they're told is important. We want to make sure that the content and the activities and the expression needs to be structured so that all members of the family can partake in them, and most importantly, partake in them together, because that shared experience is extremely important. We talked about demographics. We also did research on psychographics, and what that means is not only, quite often we think about generational commonalities, right? The millennial commonalities or Gen Z or all of those typologies, but we also paid attention to what we call culture segments. And so during our research, we wanted to start to dive a little bit deeper into the framework, and our partner MHM started to segment a grouping of cultural understanding of the visitors and what those specific groups and cultures, what drives their motivations, their desires, what they look for when visiting a historic site like the Alamo. And so just as an example of that, instead of picking a myriad of the top 10, we wanted to focus on at least the top 3 that we see here at the Alamo. And so the names, what you see on the screen there's the expression category of folks, the entertainment category, and the stimulation. And these are names just to represent what is important in a categorization of these type of segment of people. And so when you think about an individual, no matter what age, no matter what gender, no matter what nationality, we start to think about what drives those people. 51% of the folks that visit the Alamo are folks that, if they have a successful visit, these are the folks that really enjoy that their time is together and that everybody has learned a little something. They engage very heavily in interactive, but they're also enjoying person-led contents and authenticity. And so they're slightly different. What drives those people and what makes them interested is slightly different from the entertainment section, a cultural segment, which is a second group of people. 17% of those visitors at the Alamo currently live in this entertainment segment. So it's quite a bit lower than the expression. But the folks that drive these, the facts and factors that drive these folks are a little bit different. They see themselves as they like to have fun, and they see that everything is worth seeing, and what drives them is make sure that they can tell their friends about it. And so when you think about the things that drive these type of people different, most likely to be in the gift shop, what you see at the top, which is much different from those folks that are most likely to be engaging with living history. They'll enjoy larger than life immersive settings, which is a little bit different than those folks that enjoy authentic options that are tied to people. And so this is not saying, this doesn't necessarily drive the percentage of the stories or the percentage of the content, but we want to keep in mind that what we are designing as far as an experience and the interpretive messaging, it doesn't change the content of the stories that we know deserve to be told. And it doesn't necessarily eliminate anything, but it helps us to not only prioritize, but it also helps us to decide how these messages are being told. And when you think about, the third example, we can dive a little bit deeper into stimulation. 11%, these folks tend to wander rather than engage. They want to make sure that they're learning something new every time they visit to a new site or a new experience. So again, all these things, when you combine, starts to set the stage of what makes the Alamo visitor unique and special and different when compared to visitors of other historic sites or museums. So when you start to round that out, we want to touch on, before we get to an explanation of the content and how we're going to share stories, a little bit of reminder of the tools that we have. And so when you think about what we have at the Alamo, it's, for a long time, everybody focused on the experience at the church, right? Everybody that came, they might wander around the site a little bit, but the real drive was the ticket to the church and the experience as you turn the church. What we're talking about here in the Alamo plan now is we want to make sure that we all remember there are opportunities not only in the church, but great opportunities coming when you start to delineate the entire footprint, when you start to celebrate and use the entire historic site. But also there's the extreme advantage of the museum and the visitor center. And we're going to go through a little bit the differences, right? You can think about the stories that are best told in a air-conditioned environment, in an enclosed environment where you can get up close and personal to artifacts in a museum or a visitor center. Totally different from the advantages that exist when you're in that emotional state of the church, or different again from the opportunities that exist when you're right there walking in the footsteps on the historic site of exactly where history happened. And so when you think about the messaging and the stories we're telling, we're also thinking about where is the ideal opportunity to share these stories, and how does that impact the stories that are told. And you know, as Sue-Ann started when we started, the time that we're going to spend here every other week is not necessarily focused on the how or exactly the where or the exhibit design, but these factors do help to keep in mind that what we're talking about quite often is going to be about the historic site, not necessarily about a church experience or the museum and visitor center. We do deal with these stories comprehensively in the overall Alamo experience, but we want to make sure that we're also focusing on the stories that are being told on the historic site. And when you think about interpretation there on the historic site, there are certain advantages and tools that we have, and then there are certain things that we don't have that are advantages for other areas within the Alamo plan. And so when you think about the great opportunities we have in the historic site, the list there that's on the screen, right? You are celebrating the locations exactly where they happened. You are dealing with not only a site, but also the environment. And what that does is helps to give the guest scale and dimension to the experience, which certainly isn't possible in museums that are separated from the site or the historic content that they're discussing quite often. So it's a great advantage of what we have here and the historic footprint. Programming, living history, the real canons, existing historic buildings, right? You cannot deny the advantage we have with the long barrack and the church right there. And all this gives context, right? When you think about the digital methods we have, whether it's apps, augmented reality, using phones or using other tools, those are certainly tools that we can add to it. But on top of that, what is very necessary to make sure we succeed at is orientation and introduction of the story as you approach the site. So that being said, there's a couple tools that we simply don't have, and we have to keep that in mind as we talk specifically about interpretation on the site. And so some of the things, we don't have museum quality artifacts. We have them, but they will be in the museum and the visitor center. And it's important to understand that many great stories that are being told when you focus on an artifact that's very powerful. Historic site, we need to understand that we're actually using the site, and whether it be the buildings or whether it be that spot that happened there, that is the replacement for the artifact.
Appears we lost him. Let's give him a few seconds to see if he comes back. Ray, was this his last slide?
I think he has a couple more, but it's pretty close.
Okay. Looks like he might be coming back. No. Okay. I will go ahead and continue the presentation because I've worked on this with John. And if there are any questions after this segment, we can ask John. But as he mentioned, tools we don't have.
Our internet
Rhea, you came back on? Okay.
came back on. We were gone for a minute here at the Alamo offices, and now we're back. So both.
Okay.
I closed down my video thinking it might be me, but it was our building. So we are both back and hope.
Okay. Rhea, can you go back to his slide?
John has been controlling the slides, but I'm getting the
Okay.
presentation open if I need to.
Okay. So John, if you'll go back to your slide, is John gone again?
No, I'm here.
Okay. Go ahead. Go ahead and pick up on that slide.
Where I left off, I believe, is the tools that we don't have, which, if you can still see my screen, includes the museum quality artifacts, right? We don't necessarily, in a museum, we take great advantage of the power of having artifacts. When we're out on site, the disadvantage is we don't have those artifacts, but we do have the great advantage of the environment and the scale of right there being in the spot where things happened and history happened. The additional limitations we may have really happens from the environment, right? We have to deal with heat, humidity, but we do have to work with shade and light control to be able to overcome that. Finally, we are going to think about the visitor entry experience. And we know that, that we don't necessarily have a shared one, but we are going to have to deal with and do our best to orient folks because they will be coming from multiple different directions, and orientation will continue to be very important. So with that, Lori, as long as everybody can still see the screen, I'm going to hand it over to her. And Lori, you can take us through some of the future session schedules.
Great. Thanks, John. Committee members and tri-chairs, what John just went over is really, how they came about in doing the research to develop the interpretive plan and what's included in the interpretive plan. And as a reminder, the interpretive is a collection of all the stories that will be used as they go forward and build out the content, whether that content's on an app, whether it's part of a virtual reality component, whether it's part of the physical site, or whether it's in the museum. So this interpretive plan overview that John just did was really just to kind of do an overview of how they got there and what are the tools they'll be using and how this interpretation will take place. Now, what I'm going to be talking about is what we're going to be doing over the next 10 weeks and breaking out the different themes that we'll be talking about. And then we'll pause and ask questions of both John and myself. So if we can go to the next slide, please. So what we did is we took the vision and guiding principles document, the 16-page document that the Citizens Advisory Committee created, and looked at the themes within that document and came up with categories for each of the next 7 sessions. And so we have a series of sessions that'll take place almost every Tuesday. We do have a long break during the week of 4th of July. We took that week off, and so like I said, we do have a long break during then, but we almost have a session every 2 weeks. And something that we want to do during these sessions is they will be recorded by a professional team, and then they will be broadcasted on TVSA later on. And so we want to make sure that the public has an opportunity to understand that the interpretation plan for the Alamo includes telling all the stories, and they kind of get a flavor of the content and the expertise and what we're going for. And so we will put all of these dates on your calendar, and Rhea will get those out to you over the next couple days. And then we are going to ask any Citizens Advisory Committee member who's interested in helping us produce and develop the agenda for each of these interpretive sessions to reach out to us and let us know which one you'd be interested in. We have worked on a skeleton for the first session, which is Alamo, a place to call home, and then the others, we still need some assistance. And so I'll go over that in the next couple slides. Ray, you can go to the next slide. Or John. And so what we've done is develop these themes. We presented these to the tri-chairs, and the first one is Alamo, a place to call home. And so we talk about, that everyone knows the story of the Alamo, the Battle of 1836, but people don't know that this site has been home to many for over 300 years, from the earliest mission inhabitants to the homes around the plaza, and generations of families have lived on the grounds and surrounding area. So what we want to do is we've taken this overview of this theme and identified some potential topics that would be presented during this session. So we talked about the pre-contact groups living in the area, the mission inhabitants, the nearby settlements, post-mission homes and communities, soldiers' barracks, post-battle land divisions, plots and allotments, and free Black people. Those are some of the examples of topics, but staff and the tri-chairs don't want to be the ones developing these topics. And so we're asking all the committee members to sign up for a theme. And so we have asked, kind of voluntold or asked Ramon Vasquez, George Cisneros, and Rudy Rodriguez to help us produce this first session. And what they'll be doing is they'll help us develop the agenda, help us identify the experts to help talk about each of these. And then John Castman and our interpretive team will talk about how the interpretive plan addresses these issues. And then we'll have a panel discussion and then a committee discussion. So this is going to be very similar to what we did in the 2014 exercise when we developed the vision and guiding principles, but we really want it to be developed by the Citizens Advisory Committee members. And we also want to make sure that the entire public gets to enjoy the content that we produce. You can go to the next slide. The next theme that we have is Still Standing, the incredible story of how the church and Long Barrack buildings are still here. And I want to talk about how these buildings were used over the past 300 years and how they were preserved. And you can see the list of example topics, whether it's the post-mission neglect, the aftermath of the battle, dismantling for the new structures, how the roads were developed in the plaza, Catholic Church ownership, the U.S. Army's use, DRT's preservation efforts, and today's conservation work. And so if you're interested in helping us put together this panel discussion and this topic, please let us know. We'll talk more about how you do that at the end of this presentation. You'll notice on each of these slides for a theme, we have events and celebrations. And we thought instead of doing one session just on events and celebrations, we thought it'd be a good idea to talk about the individual events that occur on the site that relate to the theme as we talk about the theme. And then hopefully there'll be a discussion about potentially new events or new programming that the Alamo or the GLO can take from to help when they develop their program plan. You go to the next slide. The next one is A Fight for Independence for Some. And this talks about the impacts of slavery on the Battle of the Alamo and the Texas Revolution. And I want to focus on the impacts of slavery and then talk about Joe. What is his account of the battle and how important is Joe's story to the overall history that we have today? We're looking for theme captains for this session as well. But as you can see, we pulled each of these sections have a theme subheading, and these are the themes that were included in the Vision and Guiding Principles document that you created, so we can show how we're touching on each of those. Go to the next slide. And the next topic is Fort Alamo, and it really talks about why the battle was fought at this site, and you know, how it's been used over the past couple years, the past 300 years. Example topics include fortified mission, the Presidio and Spanish military influence on mission life, Spanish, the Mexican fort, Battle of 1836, eyewitness accounts of the battle, Mexican soldiers' account of the battle, and Quartermaster Depot. We go through the themes and then the events. And once again, we'd hope to find some theme captains to help us develop this agenda and produce this segment. Go to the next slide. Who's who's who, where, and why. And this talks about, all the individuals that participated in the battle and, where they aligned, and come up with or present a common glossary of group terms to help us identify the alliances and the disloyalty that shaped the Alamo's history. And we had the example topics that once again were pulled from our vision and guiding principles documents and the themes, and then the events and celebrations. Next slide. And then Alamo Plaza's role in the civil rights movement. And this would be the last segment that we would do that would talk about the civil rights movement in San Antonio and the integration of lunch counters, the development of the city of San Antonio around the Alamo, and using Alamo Plaza as a community gathering place. And once again, we're looking for theme captains to help us flesh out what this segment would look like as well. Next slide. And so I talked about a theme captain. And so what we need from the committee is we're hoping that each committee member will participate in one of these sessions, and they will help us develop the agenda. Who's going to do the overall presentation? What are the topics that we're going to highlight? Who are the experts that we're going to bring? So if you recall, in 2014, we brought Dr. Tiarina, who came several times. We brought Alan Hampton, who was the architect for the U.S. Capitol. He came in and spoke to the group. So something very similar to that style, but we have a list of experts, but you all may have additional experts that we need to add. We're looking at 3 to 4 per the panel that can share with us their expertise on that topic, and then help us develop the discussion questions and facilitate the discussion with the Citizens Advisory Committee. As I mentioned in the very beginning, each of these sessions will be recorded, and then they will be open to the public via our YouTube channel that the city has. But the recordings later on will be used to be broadcasted on TVSA, and they'll be produced in a nice 7-section segment on Alamo history. We were going to be sending out this presentation to everyone, and we'd like you to email Rhea your first and second choice for serving as a theme captain. And it's not mandatory, but we definitely would appreciate the help and your ideas. And if you're interested in serving on more than one, please let us know that as well. We'd like to have about 4 theme captains per meeting, but if we needed to have more, we can. And these segments are going to be 5:30 to 7:30, so about 2 hours each. Let's go to the next slide. I'll talk about the agenda. And the sample agenda will be a welcome, the presentation by PGV about that theme topic and what the interpretive plan includes on that issue or how it addresses it, and then a panel discussion with the experts. And some of those experts might be asked to do presentations on specific topics as well. And then we will have the panel discussion with canned questions that our theme captains help us create. And then we'll have the Citizens Advisory Committee member discussion. We would like to have these meetings in person, and but we'll make a remote option available to everyone as well. Go to the next slide. And that concludes my segment and John's segment, but I'd like to pause and get some feedback from everyone and answer any questions. Some things that, if there is a topic that is missing, feel free to make a suggestion, send us an email, ask a question, and we will elevate that to the tri-chairs to see if we need to incorporate it in one of the 7 segments that we already have, or add an additional segment. We have all summer to be doing this. We could add additional segments within the weeks if we needed to, but we want to make sure that we are covering all the themes that the committee members created in 2014. So with that, I'm going to open it up for a discussion.
Davis and then Ramon.
Thank you. Lori, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. Well, good evening, everybody. My main question was, at what point is this committee going to have an opportunity to weigh in on what portion of each theme is given weight in terms of the final visitor experience that we're helping to create? There's a lot of work to be done within each one of these, but will we have an opportunity to take a vote where this group gets to express their opinion about that final visitor experience? Because there's a lot of information that we just talked about. And if we treat them all equally in terms of the visitor experience, I think that's something this group needs to weigh in on.
Davis, that's a great question, and that's my fault for not addressing that. So I think we all agree that we want to make sure that we are, getting the stories right. And one of the vision and guiding principles was to make sure that our history is based on facts and archaeological evidence. Want to make sure we get that right. Kate Rogers has suggested that we create a small advisory committee of the Citizens Advisory Committee to work with the interpretive planning consultant after we do this exercise. So this is not the end of the work. As we complete this segment, there's going to be more work. And so we will do regular briefings, but there will be a subcommittee that will be created that Kate and I will staff that will have an opportunity to be able to be a sounding board for the interpretive consultants so they can get their feedback.
Great. I'm happy to volunteer for that group when the time comes.
Yes, and if you are interested, anytime over the next couple of months, please let one of the tri-chairs know, because they are going to be the group that's going to be appointing the subcommittee. Thank you for the question, Davis.
Lori, I wanted to add something to it too. Davis, we didn't necessarily say it, but I wanted to make sure that we could make it clear that we scripted not only the title, but even the overview and the questions that come from it. We scripted these sessions to encourage good conversation, and they shouldn't be misinterpreted as the names of museum galleries or a specific grouping of an experience that we already know is going to be on site. So it was our way of not necessarily following it exactly just the item by item of the guiding principles or following chronologically anything else. We came up with these together with the city and with the tri-chairs to be able to group certain topics in good conversations. So I hope that nobody is misinterpreting that these are necessarily, a solution. These are conversation starters. Relative to your question, maybe not. Maybe that's not where you're going, but I thought of that as you were asking your question, so I wanted to clarify it.
Ramon?
Good evening. Yeah, so my question, well, I have a statement first, and well, I guess a couple of statements. One is that, in the slide where you were talking about what we have, John, I wanna, and especially talking about in relationship to the 51% of why people come and visit, in regards to the authenticity and the interaction. And I don't want us to lose sight, because I see this a lot, is that we have, with the other thing that we have that's so precious on this project, and it's probably just as valuable as the buildings themselves, is the human beings, the lineal descendants that participate, that are related to the different eras of history that are layered into the site. And I don't think that that is so important, and that we can't, that is another resource and element that we have right here for this project. I don't want to lose sight of that, right? Because whether it's from the Alamo defenders or the American Indians who were here, or the first Spanish settlers, the lineal descendants are amongst us, and they live with us, and they should be utilized on this project and incorporated into this site, into this project. The other thing too is that You know, in 2014, when we were developing the themes for the guiding principles, that took a lot of work. It took a lot of hard work. And so I hope that as we move forward, Lori, that that we incorporate all those themes, and that we don't that they said, well, that we don't allow some of them to fall through the wayside, that we incorporate them in these meetings where appropriate, where they fit, right? So because each one of those themes and goals under the guiding principles took a long time to achieve, to get us to that point. So I guess that's my comments right now. Thank you.
And Ramon, those are great comments, and I just want to thank you for bringing them up and bringing up your first comment. I mean, that is well said. And one of the reasons why we have the theme captains is really to kind of have you help us, you know, make sure that we're doing this right. And we hope to have somebody from the 2014 process as a theme captain on each of those. So you can trigger, you know, this is why we did this, and this is what was important during the discussion. So I wanted to bring that up as well, because you are right. It was a lot of discussion and a lot of quiet times in those meetings, just thinking before someone could speak. And we want to have that same type of space as we go through this process.
Seneca, you have some thoughts in the chat?
Yes, just a few questions that I was thinking about is, would we be having multiple speakers? And then would they be limited to like 30, 45 minutes? I'm just trying to think of a couple of different speakers that, you know, I might like to throw this out to, but I'd want to be able to give them just maybe a little bit of a ballpark for what they would be looking at.
You know, I think that the first session is really going to kind of set the tone. So
Okay.
No pressure, Ramon, George, or Rudy, but we have our first meeting this Monday to kind of go over that. And I mean, I don't think we want to limit the speakers. If we have an expert, we want them to talk about that. So I think it just depends. But hopefully after this first week or so, we'll be able to have, you know, more of a framework for the next group to follow.
I think something to add to that, I think it is going to be one of the challenges that, you know, when you get into great topics that are also layered topics, and we've grouped some things together like that 2.5 hours goes pretty quick, especially when you're trying to make sure that you balance the experts' information that is shared, but also want to balance the great communication and the feedback that comes from that and that communication. So it is going to be one of our big challenges to make sure we find that balance and make sure that we use our time wisely, because I do believe that 2.5 hours is going to go pretty fast. So it's a good question.
So Matt, Rudy, George.
Thanks, Francisco. Yeah, I made one comment already in the chat, so I won't say that one. I don't know if this would be a theme or if it's just a different kind of piece of work, but I'd be interested in participating in what I was called the world-class experience. So in sort of two parts to that, like one is the experience of what is being created, you know, through this piece of work. Like, for example, one of the assumptions was that we have low digital assets, but it makes me think about how do we use augmented reality, for example. So there are a lot of digital assets out in the world. So maybe, you know, getting the right kind of innovators in the room could help us elevate our sort of thinking around what is the design creating. And the other is the world-class downtown experience. Like, how is, you know, the Alamo and all of this connected, right? That we talked before, to the broader downtown area. So I don't know where that fits, but I just want to toss it out there that I think our committee, you know, committee members could be good. Some of us could, you know, a lot of us could be good participants in that piece of work, and I just didn't notice it here.
It's not a theme in terms of, you know, a portion of the story, but that work kind of comes, I think we'll be discussing those types of experiences within each theme, but then more importantly, after we finish this exercise and start executing and implementing, we will have more of those discussions about augmented reality and apps and other interpretive opportunities. So I think that that'll come up in everything, but more discussion and more focus will be after this exercise.
So yeah, awesome. So I'll just toss out one more comment about that, which is that I would, if possible, early on in the themes that are being worked on, that people who are the designers are in the room doing that, because so that the design of the experience is done in concert with the content. So, and I could talk more about that later, but having done a lot of that in my career, it's much better to combine them, to do the content first and then come up with the design of the experience second.
Okay.
Ready? You're still muted.
Got it. Okay. You know, we're all trying to get to this high-tech world, but anyway, so here are my questions. One, John, I would ask you to help me begin to recognize or at least memorialize any significant departures that we are taking now in this revised version of the master plan from what we all supported and accepted in the previous one. Please understand that I'm fully supportive and certainly endorse the new approach that we're having. But I do think that there are a lot of people who voted yes and were supportive of our previous plan. And if approached by them, I'd like to be able to know where those departures might be. So if you could help me with that, I think that would be very helpful. That's number one. And then Lori, let me ask you, you know, based on the emails from Andy Segovia, I think that it's important for you to keep us updated on any legal standings or status of any legal actions. Certainly, I think we're all family here, but you know, based on the positions of my esteemed colleagues, Ramon and George Cisneros, I think that we as a committee need to understand if there's any pending legal issues that we have to be aware of. So those were my two comments, but again, congratulations, and I think we're certainly moving in the right direction.
Francisco's George Cisneros. Thank you, Rudy, for the comments, because during that last city council meeting, a council member directly asked the city attorney, is there any pending litigation or status changes that we need to be aware? And he said none. And that's why I think there was some smoke that happened last week. It is, but it's very serious that as a committee, this is the place for conversation about those things, because we are the advisory committee. How can we advise if we don't have the facts? But that's
And George,
said.
George, I do want to mention that was not the question that was asked of the city attorney. He was answering a specific question of whether or not there were issues with that were brought up during the lease, and that's what he was responding to. It was not regarding any pending litigation, and I wish Andy was here to respond to that, but I wanted to bring that up.
Okay,
I agree. I agree with Lori's interpretation, because the question was about a call that he got. So anyhow.
And I will commit that we will try to do a better job of keeping the committee up to date on any litigation, but this is not the forum to be discussing litigation.
Okay, I can accept that. I've talked to 2 city council people and other people who contacted me since then and said, just, you know, let it be, let it go, and we'll work on this. We'll get it done. So anyway, my comment was on these experts. What happens if the guy says, is there any honoraria? How do we answer that?
Those are things that we'll need to discuss. We'll discuss that on Monday. I don't want to have those discussions here, but that's what we did in 2014. I don't think it was honoraria. We paid for travel and things like that. So I think we can be flexible. We'll have to discuss that.
And the other thing is that much of the people will be dealing with copyrighted material from their research. What is the way that we will provide credit and credit them for their information? Is there a mechanism for that yet?
And those are things that we'll need to discuss, George. I mean, I'm glad you're on the first committee, so you can
Okay.
help us walk through those things.
Yeah, because that's the kind of details that get things fuzzy later down the road. Thank you.
Good. Sue-Ann, you had a thought?
I was just wondering if I missed it because I've been taking notes, but did I miss the kind of theme area where we talk about, after the battle, kind of the where San Antonio really became a city, and that development? And maybe I missed it in the other discussions, but I think that one is important and how it relates to the overall development. Others started to list it like the military history and those kinds of things. So just want to make sure that's in there.
It was combined in the civil rights theme, which that's my comment is possibly maybe the civil rights is its own theme, and then the city's expansion and development and post battle is another theme. I don't think that they belong together.
Yeah, I think.
But I do think that those topics are probably in multiple themes, though. So that I want to stress that there's going to be topics that are going to be discussed in several of these themes. So the post-battle development was it's in the still standing theme, it's in the civil rights theme, and there's another theme, but it'll be through multiple themes.
Thank you.
I know we've got some good exchange going in the chat from some of our, if this was social media, we'd have a little star for our frequent contributors. But I want to make sure, is there anyone that we've not heard from yet this evening that's got a question or a thought or a comment that they'd like to share? Christine, you had a thought on the World Heritage piece. You want to speak to that?
Sure. Thanks a lot. And yeah, I put that in the chat. I just think it's, one of the things that we don't want to lose sight of is, kind of thinking of concentric circles of perspective when it comes to, themes, stories, visitors, audiences. I mean, we have, descendant, community members who we want to be sure we're including. And we want to make sure that we're using universal kind of themes and concepts so that, we are tying to the World Heritage Site, the Alamo's connection to the other 4 missions, and recognizing that it is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. And so those broader themes, I just don't want us to lose track of those as part of the discussion, because I think, the messages that we're talking about obviously exist at all levels. And the only other piece I would mention, obviously there's I think it might be an opportunity to bring in, if we have experts related to Texas curriculum, I don't want to miss the education opportunity for our youth upfront during this process. And there's certainly an inextricable link, I think, between interpretation and education. So yeah, thanks. And look for, although I think it's beyond the scope of what I'm able to commit to serve as a theme lead, I'll certainly participate, and I'm happy to share, perspectives from the Park Service, and as someone like many of you who's been, working in visitor centers and doing interpretation in an inclusive way. So I'm really happy to see this discussion. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Christine. I know we've also got about a solid half of the body tonight off camera. I want to make sure we don't miss out on any of you all. Is there anyone out there that's got their camera off right now that's you've got something to offer or a question to ask?
I'll just say the text that's on the right when people are texting, And especially a couple of long ones by Matt I was wanting to read, and they seem to disappear pretty quickly.
Forrest, you can scroll back up and down. Just put your cursor over it, and then if your mouse has a wheel, kind of push up and down, or if you've got the arrows on your keypad, you can go back and see all of the comments. And actually, also for those of you that have not been taking a deep dive into the fantastic minutes that Ray has been collecting and then publishing to the team. We always have the full script of any chat that we had at the end of the minute. So that's always going to be there for a reference for you, Forrest. Any additional thoughts? We've got a couple of other agenda items, so we do have more work ahead of us, but I want to make sure that everyone that wanted to comment or question on what's been shared so far had the chance to do so.
I just have a quick comment. I'm just want to express gratitude for the thoughtfulness and just this format moving forward. I appreciate the opportunity for not only obviously the connection back to the guiding principles and the meat of the document to really ensure that that work doesn't go to waste, but more so just the deliberate nature of bringing in committee members at this point and helping to think through the next steps and lending their expertise. So just an expression of gratitude for the thoughtfulness in the format.
Francisco, I know that questions are starting to dwindle down, and I wanted to go back. I realized that Rudy asked a question, or specifically kind of put a statement out there that I wanted to address at least. And Rudy, we can get into it further, maybe at the next meeting when we're in person. But you had laid out the request to make sure that we highlighted when we were starting to see change compared to the previous plan. And I have a thought on at least the question, the answer to that challenge now, in that when we went through and highlighted the list of things that were proposed to be amendments, like the way that we were treating the porosity of the site and the parades and celebrations and changes, the lack of depression of the site, and now addressing it with paving. All those things are physical in nature, and we made a conscious effort to put that slide at the end that said, when we think about it interpretively, we know that there's a challenge of a change in not necessarily a single point of entry, but we would not lose the challenge of making sure that orientation stays high, and the rest of it should not and will not impact the way that we treat the interpretive content. And so I guess I wanted to remind you of that, Rudy, and let you know that a lot of the interpretive content that we'll be discussing over the next 7 sessions or so, the changes that we made in the amendments that we made do not, at least in my mind right now, don't impact the way that we want to tell those stories. There's some physical things that change how we might send them, but the stories themselves don't change. And so we'll continue to keep our eye on it, but hopefully the answer to your question is no, there is no change, because we're still appealing to the same content itself. It's just how it's expressed is different.
John, I would have to thank you for that and tell you that while I believe that is hopefully what we're doing, anytime that there is either a physical change or a philosophical change to the approach of the interpretive plan, I think it's important that we as ambassadors of the plan are up to speed with that. So I think if you would take that just kind of in the context of kind of transparency and allowing us or giving us the insight that we need, so that when we're approached by the larger community, we have a kind of a good answer for why we're moving in a certain way.
That's a good point. Will do.
Thank you, John.
And so before, thank you, Rudy, for that thoughtful comment. Before we turn away from this, Matt, I know you had a lot of other great thoughts that you're developing quite a readership in the chat. So I just wanted to give you one more bite at the apple, if you wanted to kind of pull the gem out and offer it, because it's a great discussion.
Well, I mean, thanks, Francisco. I just want to capture them and get them down there, and so I tossed out a couple of other ideas that may just fit inside of some of the existing themes, or may warrant an additional theme. So I kind of leave it to you guys, the tri-chairs, to kind of take it with a grain of salt and see what fits. But I just want to make sure, like, since all this is being documented, like, you have my ideas. I don't want to take more time. I know everyone's lots of things for us to get through.
Great. Thank you, Matt. So Lori, back to you.
Okay, if you all remember slide 15, just joking. On that slide, we talked about the dates and the themes, and the very last theme we had archival investigation report. And so that is when, hopefully, the committee that we've created to help oversee that archival investigation report will be able to present the report. So if you recall, we have a committee that includes Carrie Lattimore, Ramon Vasquez, and Dr. Sharon Skrivarsik. Those committee members, along with our city archaeologists, myself, some staff from our capital projects team, will be providing the oversight of this report. And this report then will help us develop an action plan in the event there are discoveries. And it's at that point, when we develop the action plan, we will also create an archaeological advisory committee that will include all the local indigenous groups. Plus, we'll invite those 6 that the GLO had included on their advisory committee. But we're in the process of developing the scope. We've got some feedback from Ramon and some others that we're addressing. And once we get that scope finalized, then we'll start the actual report, and we'll keep you updated throughout the next couple months. But the plan is to present that full report to this committee in mid to late August. And are there any questions on that before we hand it over to Kate?
Yeah, I have a question. Well, I just pretty much a statement, Lori, in regards to the archival investigation report. As these themes are being, developed, I think we should also be open to, for the archival investigation, because it also may inform that theme. So, for example, like what we've talked about before. So in our archival investigation, as we're doing the study and we discuss and we research where the Mexican soldiers were buried that died at the Battle of the Alamo, which nobody knows right now, right? So if our archival investigation determines that we have an idea of what happened to the Mexican soldiers, well, that should inform the interpretation as well.
Absolutely.
So just wanted to make that statement that as we move along, there may be additional things that will inform those smaller committees.
And that's very exciting. Thank you for bringing that up.
Lori, may I ask one question? Because it was in the chat, but it might get lost. Did people live on the site and/or use the site actively prior to 300 years ago?
Yes, and so, we talk about 300 years of history, but we know there's history before. And so, yes, we will address that and correct that through these themes.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. And I wasn't assuming, I didn't know, even though they did live beforehand, it may be that 300 years is what we want to bite off. So I wasn't assuming, I was just
No.
wondering.
Well, I wasn't saying that life began 300 years ago either. So
Are you
we
sure?
were all clear.
That's who you talked to.
So with that, I think, is there somebody else?
Yeah, George had a thought. George, you're muted. George, could you unmute? George, you're muted. We can't hear you.
Okay, I said, we should all be aware that we're approaching the bicentennial of the Battle of the Alamo. And some of the most critical things that led to that battle occurred right now in Mexico City in 1821. So people need to do a little bit of homework and realize that in 14 years, 3 months, we will already be past the Battle of Bejar, the bicentennial of that. So the whole manifest destiny issue of American, starts in 1806 in New Orleans, kind of the big movements coming to Texas. But 1821, if you really want to understand what we're doing and why some of us are so adamant about the positions we take a little time and study the revolt in Mexico City against Spain. And that's right now 200 years ago. And as we move into 2036, and which is going to be like a spectacular, issue. Please, everybody, do your homework now, because it takes a lot of thinking to understand how the revolt from Spain leads to the Battle of the Alamo, and it's linear. You can see it happening. So, that's just commentary and editorial. But Matt, you're asking a bunch of questions that are brought up that subject. Do your homework. Talk to me off to the side, and I can give you some great books. Thank you.
Francisco, are we done?
We are good. I think folks are in the chat are starting to indicate their volunteer preference, which I think is fantastic. We would direct you to email Rhea. That's kind of the tool of record, right? As Rhea is going to be collecting everybody's bids. And so if you could tell us, what ones you're most interested in. And if you would, when you send that into Rhea, if you could indicate in a numerical order which ones are most important to you. I think these are such great topics that I anticipate we'll have some instances where they may be oversubscribed. So if we have an insight as to which ones are most important to you, Rhea can do her best, working with the team and the tri-chairs to try and slot folks. But if you would, having in the chat, it's great to see where everyone's enthusiasm is, but make sure you send it to Rhea, because that is the official ballot box, as it were. So with that, Laura, if you want to proceed.
Great. The next and last item we have is a presentation by Kate Rogers on the collections and curatorial facility. This is something that's been discussed over the past couple months. There were a lot of questions about this during our design team discussions. And so Kate is here to present to you where they are in the collections and curatorial facility, and really clarify what it is and what it is not. And I want to stress that this facility is not a replacement for the visitor center and museum. This facility is a collections facility that will serve as storage and exhibit space, and is maybe only 25,000 square feet, of which 2/3 of that is really going to be storage. The rest is exhibit space. And, by comparison, the World Class Museum is at least 100,000 square feet. And so I want to really stress that this is not a replacement. This is maybe a supplemental building to help us with our education and exhibits. So with that, I'm going to introduce Kate Rogers.
Thank you, Lori. Yeah, so I'm glad to be here with you all tonight. So we'll spend the majority of our time, as Lori mentioned, talking about the collections and curatorial facility, which the plans for this will be officially publicly released tomorrow. So the committee timing is very good, so you all can see it before it's released to the public. We'll also spend a minute talking about the 18-pounder and the moisture monitoring initiative that's going on in the church in Long Barrett, because I know that this committee has had a lot of questions about the status of that project. So if we could move to the next slide. There we go. So just to orient you, I think most of y'all know this, but the footprint for the collections building is in the northeast corner of the site at the intersection of Houston and Bonham Street. And as Lori mentioned, this is about a 24,000 square foot building. It is in a space that is occupied by temporary buildings today that largely house staff, materials, storage. The Alamo Rangers are back there. And it has been a disturbed site since the turn of the century. So this is not new ground that is proposing to be disturbed within the overall footprint of the Alamo. Next slide. So this will give you a sense of the first floor of the building. In blue is the collections. So I know that Dr. Skabarzik and others are very aware that for a long time we haven't had a museum grade home for the Alamo collection, which is over 2,000 items. So it's significant, and a lot of those are paper. And so at long last, we will have a facility where we can keep those at the humidity and temperature, et cetera, where they need to be to ensure their preservation over the long term. There is exhibition space envisioned on the first floor. There's space for the curatorial and archaeological staff within the building. So this will be where both the Alamo collection and the Phil Collins collection will be housed, at least initially. Next slide. So this gives you an idea of the second floor, which is much smaller and is almost completely dedicated to exhibition space. So between the two floors, we get to about 10,000 square feet of exhibition space. And the thinking is that once this building opens, which is scheduled to happen in the summer of 2022, so a little more than a year from now, that the Phil Collins collection will go on display in the building initially, and then once the visitor center and museum is complete, the Phil Collins collection will move over to the new visitor center. And then what we're excited about is this building would then be used for traveling or temporary exhibition space. So I know Matt and others were commenting in the chat about teaching about U.S. history more broadly, which there's a huge need for both children and adults who visit the site to really understand where the Alamo fit into the larger context. So this would give us the chance to bring in exhibits from all over the country to come to the Alamo and to continue to bring visitors back to the site. Next slide. So this just gives you, again, a reiteration of the square footage. We will have space for the archaeological and conservation staff, which unfortunately right now they're in a closet in the annex in Alamo Hall. So it'll be nice for them to have space to actually do their work. So the conservator at the Alamo, who is leading the project in the church in Long Barrack, and she's, you know, one of the best, you know, she's in a little tiny perch where she doesn't even have enough space to do her work. So this will be very nice for them to be able to spread out and do what they need to get done. Next slide. So this gives you, these are initial renderings. Of course, there's still much more work to be done, but it gives you a sense of what this building is going to look like. You see the lobby there, and you'll see that there is a good amount of space there for exhibition. And then you can see it's open to the second floor where people can look down into the floor. And this will allow us, again, so right now, because of our limited space, about 1% of the Alamo collection is actually on display. So this would get us a long way down the road. Next slide. Again, this is just another view of the first floor looking onto the reception area and then up to the second floor. And then the next slide will show you what the second floor view will look like. And this has more space for exhibition. So a significant portion of the Collins collection initially will be housed here. And it will include some of the papers, a lot of the weaponry from the collection, the cannonballs, etc. And then he's got a lot of, you know, uniforms and other interesting items that will be placed into display as well. Next slide. So this gives you a view of the front of the building. You see that large tree that's ghosted out in the front. That's a very large red oak that has obviously been there for quite some time. Our goal is to preserve that tree. So it's just ghosted out here so you can see what the front of the building will look like. It is intended to not look like it was part of the site back when in the battle, during 1836. It uses a lot of the same materials in terms of native limestone and wood and other things, but it's not intended to look historic in any way. So it's a modern facility. Next slide. This gives you a view on Bonham Street. So this is where hopefully once we get back up and running, where we can welcome school children and field trips back to the site, that they'll have a great entrance to enter, and we can, engage them in tours and other things. So this gives you a view of how that is intended to work. And then the next slide gives you a view off of Houston Street. So this is an existing gate that exists in the site today. And again, if you were to look through that today, you would see these temporary buildings that are back there, and you'd be able to see our storage area and so forth. So this is really quite an improvement to that northeast corner of the current Alamo footprint. Next slide. One of the big questions we had from the Historical Commission, and I'm sure others on this call might have the same concern, which is how does this impact the view shed, which we always have to be really cognizant of. So this gives you an idea of the height of the building, and you can see where the church is in the foreground, so it does not in any way diminish the impact of the view of that church. Next slide. And then we took another shot. So this would be if you were, sitting where I'm sitting roughly, which is across the street, Alamo Street, and looking back toward the site at a 6-foot tall man, again, to say that this does not in any way disrupt that iconic view that we're all so proud of. Next slide. So this again shows you where we were. This back in the day was a Studebaker dealership, an auto manufacturing facility, a Ford dealership, and now it will at long last be home to the Alamo collection. Next slide. And this is just one more view of the front of the building, so you get a sense of size and scale. Okay, next slide. I do want to say a thank you to all of the members of the committee who were able to join us, especially Councilwoman Villagran, who was here for the grand opening of the 18-pounder on La Soya House interpretation. It was a great day. It was, recapturing some of the momentum that had been lost in the project. That's a very iconic cannon. I think the team did a remarkable job in the replication of it. And I can tell you it's gotten a wonderful response from visitors. So we're still working through safety and signage and some of the things around the site, as you know, anytime it's in a public space like that. But I think overall it's been a big success. And I know, we've gotten good feedback from some of the local businesses about hours and so forth, and we've tried to adjust accordingly. Next slide. So this just gives you different views of what that exhibit looks like in case you haven't been able to come down and see it. Again, it's across the street. And so once we get to the place where Alamo is actually closed between Houston and Crockett, I'm excited because the first weekend, June the 4th, when the street will be closed officially for the first time, we're going to have one of our Texas trade days on the site where we have all sorts of activations going on. Our living historians will be out in a full court press demonstrating the types of crafts and things that were going on back in 1836. And so I think it'll be a nice activation to show people what's possible when we can really make use of the entire plaza footprint. And of course, we'll have some fun things going on over at the Cannon, including a musket volley, which was real popular at the grand opening. Okay, and then the last slide I have for tonight is just to update you all on the moisture monitoring, because I know this has been a big topic. And all of the equipment, so there's 4 monitors inside the church, there's 4 outside the church, all of the cameras and monitors have been installed and became fully operational on April the 21st. So this project will be going on for 1 year to really analyze the damp inside the walls, the salination inside the walls, to really understand what is happening both at the foundation level and within the walls of the church. I know Dr. Skavarzik and others have asked about what's the long-term plan for the preservation of both the walls and the roof of the church. And so the idea is once this study is complete and we have the results, we'll be able to share them with you all and others and be able to talk about what the long-term plan is. Because I think what I always say, our role at the trust, our most important responsibility is the preservation of the Long Barrack and the church. And so we always want to keep this front and center and make sure that we're doing a good job. As I mentioned, our conservator earlier, she would tell you if she were sitting here that the church is quite a sick patient today. You know, we've got a lot of deterioration and we're going to need to figure out what needs to be done in order to stop that from happening, to make sure that it's here for future generations. So with that, I will close and I would be happy to answer any questions that you all may have.
Davis, go ahead.
Thank you. Hi, Kate. Good evening.
Hi.
I think the 18-pounder exhibit is a great example of the kind of interpretive exhibits that the space in general has lacked for decades. What I don't understand, and I don't believe that everybody on the committee was on the same page of all the time and money that was spent producing this great interpretive exhibit, and it's considered temporary. My understanding is that in 18 months it's going to be torn down. Can you explain the reasoning behind that?
Yeah, so the reasoning behind it, as I understand it, Davis, is it had to do with permitting from UNESCO. Since we are a World Heritage Site, there are certain things we can do in terms of permanent improvements to the site and certain things that have to be temporary. With that being said, I will tell you that the 18-pounder and that northwest corner, or the southwest corner, are absolutely part of the plan that's in the works for the long-term visitor center and museum. And so the cannon will find a permanent home in its original location where it was. It's just that the base beneath it might change slightly during that time frame. But I hear you. It's a great addition.
What's the difference between interpretive and replica? Because I thought if we labeled it as an interpretive experience, that would be acceptable. But if it was a replica, that's a no-no with UNESCO.
That's correct.
I may be wrong.
Yeah, that's correct.
So
fortunately, I mean, I think it's a fair question, Davis, and I'm happy to track it down for you. You know, unfortunately, I wasn't here when the decision was made to make it a temporary exhibit. And I do think one thing that I do understand, we can go back to UNESCO, given the success of it and how much folks like it. We can go back and ask for an extension, which would be nice, you know, as we're still working on the visitor center and museum.
Okay. I just hate to see us spend this kind of money and create something that the visitors love and then tear it down. That just boggles me. But okay, thank you.
I'll make sure to pass your feedback along too. Thank you.
Kate, if you don't mind, another piece that I might add to that is that another attribute or advantage of this tool, Davis, is that the ATI staff is going to be using it as a testing and learning way. And so that the ability for them to change the manner in which they incorporate living history, no living history, different tools that are at their disposal now, so that they can start to gauge the visitor impact and the advantages of certain methods. And so that is another reason to treat it as a quote unquote temporary, because the learnings that you get from this will help to make the permanent one that much better by not only adjusting exactly which interpretive content as an example, but also, you know, everybody, you know, it's so much easier for the ATI staff to use that reader rail. It works great, and the tall ones don't work. It's a little too high. I can't point to it. They can't see it. I mean, all those lessons learned from this thing, it was intentional during its design to test some things, and so they could use it differently. And so that's another way of interpreting it and explaining the benefits of it, in addition to just great guest experience and impact. It's also a great tool for the ATI staff to learn from and the manner in which they engage the guests.
Does UNESCO also have any say-so in the new exhibits building, since it's on site?
No, it didn't have any impact on World Heritage status because it is in an area that was already disturbed and was already used for staffing purposes, if you will. So we didn't need to go back for a permit from UNESCO for that. We have worked very closely with the Historical Commission, and we will do that moving forward, because it'll be important that that they feel good about the work that we're doing, and so that the permits that we are going to need from them moving forward, that that we can have a good partnership and a good working relationship with them.
I have a question concerning verbiage and signage. Throughout the press conference and the ribbon cutting ceremony or whatever that was the other day, and in the press, they kept referring to the invading Mexican army, and that verbiage is not historically correct, because how can an army invade its own country? So we need to remove the word invading when it comes to the 18-pounder. I was really shocked on the front page of the Express News that Huddleston mentioned the invading Mexican army when they weren't invading. This was Mexico. So up until that date of that, we need to stay historically correct and not, be interpretive and misstate the actual schedule and the time of that cannon being there in that space. I was very offended by that press conference. So thank you.
Thank you, George. Other questions? Come on.
Yeah, I have one. Oh. What'd you call on, Francisco?
You.
Oh. No, so thank you for the presentation, Ms. Rogers. But I think that's why it's so important that we get the interpretation right, as we move forward, because there is some language that's it's going to be offensive, and it's going to be inaccurate historically. And so when we start talking about myths and realities, I'm hoping that will kind of come out so that we can inform the interpretive plan and the language, the verbiage that's going to be used a little bit more correctly. I've always said, what is a Mexican tourist, how do they see themselves in this story? Because that's one of the things that we want to achieve in this project, because they spend their money here in our city as well. So I think that's going to be really important. I'm also really glad to hear that we're being a member from 2014. I'm also really glad that we're actually taking UNESCO a little bit more seriously now, because I know in 2014, when we were bringing up UNESCO and the parks was the authority was talking to us about what we couldn't do and what we could do, it was very clear. It was very clear what the instructions were to us. And so we kind of, we talked about that. I remember telling people, how do you know you can put the 18-pound cannon there? So, but anyway, I'm really, really glad that we're not losing sight that this is a World Heritage Site. It's a UNESCO site. And I felt for the past few years that had been, that we were that we were not putting emphasis on that, as it didn't weigh as much. So I'm really glad to hear that.
Thank you, Ramon. Thank you for your comments. I appreciate it.
Other thoughts? Questions?
I do agree with Ramon that this is a new direction in embracing the World Heritage Site, and I look forward to expanding that discussion and having it influence our work.
Laura, do you have any, sounds like we're good on questions for right now. Thank you, Kate, for that great update. Laura, do we have any other business before we look to the tri-chairs for their closing thoughts for the evening?
No, just a reminder to send Rhea via email your top 2 themes that you'd be interested in serving as a theme captain. And, you know, the tri-chairs remain available to address any questions you may have. So please reach out to them if you have any questions. But I'm going to ask Councilmember Rebecca Villagrán to provide closing remarks before we conclude the meeting.
Thank you all very much for the feedback, for the conversation. I did have to step away for a little while to kick off another meeting, but I was back here. But I did hear your conversations, and yes, please sign up for theme captains. And as was mentioned earlier, I think just hearing what you all have said, seeing the presentation, this is the reset and the recalibration that we have needed to move forward together. I am looking forward to the great, even more in-depth conversations we are going to have. And yes, Ramon, talking about World Heritage more intently is music to my ears, because that is what I have been saying since the very beginning, being the representative of District 3. And that is why I know that we are being intentional and thoughtful, and the conversation about not just 300 years, but all of the thousands of years of our Indigenous community and all of the inhabitants of this area, this space, is extremely important for the telling of our story, the telling of our origins, and the telling of also where we're going and where we are going to continue to make history as a city and as a people. So thank you. I think I would love to say just everybody buckle in, because it's going to get really, really good as we move forward. And I do want to turn it over to my tri-chairs just for closing remarks as well. But thank you all. Aranetta?
Yes, this is Aaron, and I do think that we're on quite a launch here. But I do have a comment, and I'm disappointed to learn, and I was unable to be there, but I did read Scott's article, and I think that I must be brainwashed too about the language, because I didn't pick up on that, George. And I do think it is critical that from the very beginning we use the correct language about the Alamo, and the fact that at the time of the battle, you know, this was Mexican territory. And I think that it is critical that going forward, that language is corrected, so that we are certain that whatever we're putting out there is anything that a child or any scholar anywhere would understand, that we definitely know what we're talking about. So I would ask Ms. Rogers to also be aware that that language is very important to us as San Antonians, and we want to be able to stand by everything that is published and written. And if we can be helpful in any way in having that to be done, we stand ready to do that. That is part of what I hope that we will be able to accomplish going forward. Thank you so much.
And I agree, and I look forward to our summer school course. As a professor, I have to say this is like going to summer school, but I learned so much, and I get so excited about what I learned, because it's just such a rich, deep history, and we should all learn more about it and know more about it and be able to share that history with everyone else. And I think that's definitely our goal. It's been our goal since 2014 and even before that. And so I really look forward to spending my summer course with you. Thank you.
Thank you, leaders. We appreciate the great parting thoughts. Thank you everyone for your time tonight. We will see you back here in 2 weeks. Just as a process reminders, make sure to get your volunteer requests into Rhea for your 2 choices if you're interested in serving as a theme captain. And then to clarify, many of you expressed interest in being a part of the smaller subcommittee that will help look at the interpretive plan down the road. Those offers and requests need to go to your tri-chairs because they will be the ones making the determination who serves on that team. So with that, we wish you a wonderful rest of your week.
Can I ask a question? I know we're doing a better job with the minutes and the agendas and all that. Is that being sent on to our council as well? I just wondered, in communicating back on what we're doing as a committee back to the person that appointed us.
We haven't had one recently, but all of the other meetings we have, all of those minutes have been sent to the council members.
And there was a comment asking us to send out the presentation with the theme descriptions. Ray will be sending that out as well.
Have a lovely rest of the week, y'all.
Thank you. Bye. Bye, everybody.